J.K. Rowling continues to glorify Magdalen Berns, someone whose rabid antisemitism, not to forget her racism and transphobia, has been documented in detail for more than half a decade at this point. Someone I and numerous other human rights activists have reported on specifically to deny gender-critical bigots any grounds to claim ignorance as they do so. Based on this, I can only conclude that they know full well what they are doing when they continue to glorify this vicious anti-Semite, that this is no accident, as we'll discuss in today's video. But first, a quick content warning for the following: transphobia, racism, ableism, antisemitism, the Holocaust, and Nazi fascism. If our work has helped you, please consider supporting us via Patreon so I can keep the channel running. We cannot survive without your support. You can also help us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media. I'd also just like to take this time to remind our viewers that the statements made throughout our videos are the opinions of myself, the host, based on the evidence I have available to me. They are not and should not be taken as unquestionable fact, which is why we reference everything, because we're fallible. Thus we strive to give you, the viewer, the ability to check all evidence yourself in order to make up your own mind, which is what the reference numbers in the top left corner are for, being numbers that match up with the reference list found in the transcript linked down below. As such, we encourage all viewers to do their own research to reach an informed conclusion about the topic. Hi there, my name is Ethel Thurston, she, her, they, them, and we need to talk about Joanne Kathleen Rowling's refusal to stop glorifying a rabid anti-Semite, Magdalen Berns, a name which our regulars are sadly all too familiar with. But for those of you new here, Berns was a particularly abusive gender-critical fascist. She liked to double up on her transphobia with racism, seen in this infamous post in which she compares trans people to blackface, trivializing anti-black racism while simultaneously dehumanizing all trans women. Yet this is not the worst thing Berns ever did, not by a long shot. Berns was an early promoter of the anti-Semitic conspiracy that Jewish billionaires, such as George Soros and John Stryker, were pushing transgender ideology. This links up to gender-critical fascism's fundamental tenets, namely that trans men are vulnerable girls who have, as part of some insidious conspiracy, been misled into believing that they're men as a means to pressure them to undergo chemical and surgical sterilization. Said narrative feeds the Nazi conspiracy that Jewish people are decreasing white fertility whilst increasing immigration in order to destroy white Western civilization, something known as the Great Replacement Conspiracy. This accusation mirrors those made by the Nazis of Nazi Germany, who accused a gay Jewish sexologist, Magnus Hirschfeld, of infecting the German people with sexual degeneracy, turning them gay and trans, weakening the nation to outside invaders. That is why Nazi papers such as Der Stürmer ran front-page articles like this one containing a sketch of Magnus calling him a, quote, greedy Jew, peasant's friend, end quote, before going on to declare that, quote, the Jews are our misfortune, end quote. There really is no difference between the accusations made by Berns and this Nazi paper. If you'd like to know more about gender-critical fascism and how both of its fundamental beliefs are intrinsically fascist, we recently published a detailed breakdown of the entire movement using over 56 separate references to evidence our argument. Thankfully, Berns died in 2019, purging the world of one more Nazi. But this is someone Rowling has been very publicly criticized for glorifying in the past, most notably in her 2020 essay in which she asserted that, quote, months later I compounded my accidental like crime by following Magdalen Berns on Twitter. Magdalen was an immensely brave young feminist and lesbian who was dying of an aggressive brain tumor. I followed her because I wanted to contact her directly, which I succeeded in doing. However, as Magdalen was a great believer in the importance of biological sex and didn't believe lesbians should be called bigots and not dating trans women with penises, dots were joined in the heads of Twitter trans activists and the level of social media abuse increased. End quote. Clearly acknowledging that she's at least aware of the controversy surrounding Berns. Yet, as to the extent that she was specifically aware of Berns' anti-Semitism when she wrote her essay, we could only speculate based on probability. That said, Rowling was certainly made aware of this issue by countless trans people who called her out for glorifying said horrific anti-Semite, again, deliberately doing so to cut that excuse off in future. Which brings us back to the post shared at the start, published in April of 2025, 5 whole years after Rowling was criticised en masse for glorifying Berns. These were part of a conversation in which Rowling defended her anti-trans bigotry, leading her to ask, quote, "Can you point to what I've ever said that shows I think trans people are subhuman? I just acknowledge that trans-identified men experience prejudice. It's just not misogyny." End quote. Oh, that's easy. All we have to do is look at Rowling's last 3 tweets, including this one. In the first, she labels trans women trans-identified men, misgendering and thus dehumanizing trans women by stripping them of their right to identify, as well as severing them from their lived experience of suffering violent misogyny. She then doubles down on this in asserting that she's, quote, "pretty sure I can talk about being a woman better than any man can," end quote. Again, misgendering trans women whilst presenting herself as an arbiter on the lived experiences of all women. Hell, even in the fucking question, she once again labels trans women as trans-identified men, misgendering them, which is a form of dehumanization, the very act of marking someone or even an entire group as subhuman. That's literally the purpose of dehumanization. Of course, this is not the only evidence of Rowling viewing trans people as subhuman, as seen when Aidan Comerford replied, sharing a screenshot of Berns labeling trans women blackface actors, before Aidan went on to add, quote, "Prejudice like this? Didn't you write an essay saying this person was a big inspiration on trans rights, directing people to think of trans people this way?" End quote, clearly referencing the essay shown earlier. This provided Rowling with a golden opportunity to finally address the issue of Berns' flagrant racism, transmisia, and of course, her antisemitism, to finally put distance between herself and Berns' Nazi beliefs. So how did Rowling seize the opportunity? Well, by waiting for her sycophantic followers to rush to her defense, before doubling down on the glorification of Berns' behavior. One such defender came in, commenting that, quote, "Jesus, is Aidan still banging on about Magdalen Berns at any given opportunity? He obviously can't give an example of you saying that, so drags up a screenshot from a woman who died over 5 years ago. He's obsessed with Berns because she's a woman who can't answer back." End quote, to which Rowling responded with, quote, "I don't think it's that she can't answer back. Something about Berns angered and frustrated him to a degree I find genuinely disturbing. What that is, only he and his therapist know." End quote. And she's right. Something about Berns has angered a lot of people. And that thing is her horrific bigotry, including the promotion of anti-Semitic narratives that feed Nazi conspiracies. That tends to upset normal people, yet Rowling resorts to ableism, acting like people put off by literal fascism need therapy. Yet, to be fair, this comment doesn't really say much about Berns, at least not directly, merely that Rowling finds frustration as a response to Nazi bigotry to be disturbing. Things got worse for her, however, in a second exchange in which the same defender asserted that, quote, "Remember when someone recorded themselves speed scrolling through Aidan's tweets that mentioned Berns and it ended up being nearly 4 minutes long?" End quote, to which Rowling responded by very unapologetically asserting that, quote, "I wonder what it was about Berns, a fiercely intelligent lesbian who couldn't be bullied into agreeing that men should transgress literally all women's boundaries that angered Aidan so much he was still obsessively denigrating her even after her early death." End quote. Once again, with Rowling going out of her way to glorify Berns to her 14 million followers a whole 5 years after she'd received mass criticism for doing the very same. For context, it needs to be pointed out that every other reply to Rowling's final post, the one in which she labels Berns a fiercely intelligent lesbian, is a trans person or ally pointing out Berns' horrific anti-Semitism. That's how well known said violent bigotry is. That's where the majority of the conversations relating to Berns end up. For Rowling to have missed all this over the last 5 years is so statistically improbable that it might as well be an impossibility. The only way Rowling could have avoided learning the details of Berns' anti-Semitism is if she ran away from any and all posts the moment she saw the word antisemitism, which would still confirm that she was at least aware of the accusations to some degree. Fact is, Berns isn't alone. Rowling is also a close and personal friend of gender-critical propagandist Helen Joyce, whom Rowling not only poses for photographs with, but has gushed about as her quote-unquote battle buddy. Joyce also published a book, Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality, in which she presents 3 names whom she believes are part of a quote-unquote global agenda to turn naive young girls into trans boys in order to sterilize them. Those names, George Soros, John Stryker, and Jennifer Pritzker, all 3 of whom are Jewish. This is modern-day blood libel. Then we have Rowling's connections to Kelly J. Key Minshall. You might remember her as the gender-critical leader whose anti-trans hate rallies in Australia and Aotearoa were attended and supported by flag-waving Nazis. Not only did said Sikh-hailing Nazis turn up in support of Key Minshall, but key speakers at Key Minshall's event were seen posing happily for photographs alongside them. That's how well they got along. When pressed about these facts during a radio interview with Kim Hill, here's what Key Minshall had to say for herself.
When you were asked about the motive of the trans lobby, you said at the extreme end, it's very dangerous people who want access to children and an entire dismantling of society. Do you think that that is not catastrophizing?
Do you not know about the billionaires who the billionaire men who are pushing this ideology and funding it? Are you not aware of those people?
No, tell me more.
Are you saying that that doesn't happen?
No, tell me more.
You just need to... No, women across New Zealand, they are very, very aware that there are men in women's spaces, men in women's sports, and they are giving carte blanche access to, unfettered access to women's spaces as soon as you say that those men are part of the transgender ideology. As soon as a man basically puts on a dress, he is given unfettered access to women's spaces, including prisons, including rape crisis centres. And I just think it's absolutely preposterous if you don't think women across New Zealand are afraid of that.
Could you please tell me a little more about the billionaires funding the transgender lobby?
Well, yes, you've got Big Pharma, for example. They make a substantial amount of money out of transgenderism. I want to know why it's not important to a journalist to address the fact that there are men in women's spaces.
It's really important as a journalist for me to know more about the billionaires funding the transgender lobby. And since you raised it, I'm interested to know further details. What can you tell me?
Well, I would like to know why, as a journalist, you are prepared to be distracted by that, as opposed to...
But you mentioned it.
Notice how Key Minshall throws the conspiracy out there, but the moment she's asked to name names, she realizes that she's fucked up. That if she starts listing Jewish people in the context of Sikh-hiding Nazis attending her hate rallies, Kim Hill is going to point out exactly what she's doing. That's why Kim Minchell is so quick to try and flip the narrative, acting as if Kim Hill is the one who brought the topic up, when no, it was her. If Kim Minchell didn't realize that she was being anti-Semitic, she'd just name names. The fact that she doesn't demonstrates that she's fully aware of what she's doing. This is the same Kim Minchell who Rowling publicly offered her financial support to sue journalists into silence when they began reporting on said Nazi attendance, an offer Kim Minchell never took her up on. Why? Well, possibly because said Sikh-hiding Nazis claim to have been invited by Kim Minchell's group, and such a case making it to court would likely require any such communications to be made public. There was actually a very similar case wrapping up around the same time in which that very thing happened, outing a gender-critical fascist as a full-blown Nazi, leading said Nazi to declare bankruptcy the following year. So again, this isn't a once-off, nor is Rowling alone in this. Magdalen Berns has been adopted as an idol by the gender-critical movement, someone you'll frequently see in gender-critical banners and art. Notable examples of said idolization are the LGBT Alliance's co-founder Bev Jackson, gender-critical writer Julie Bindel, and the entire For Women Scotland team, all of whom look up to Berns' horrific anti-Semitism as something to aspire towards. This also debunks the claim that people such as Aidan and myself are obsessed with Berns because Berns cannot defend herself. Not only does the trans community continue to call out the anti-Semitism at the core of the current gender-critical movement, but it's the gender-critical movement that continues to glorify Berns, even in death. You don't get to make Berns the face of your hate movement, only to cry when the people you target point out her history of violent bigotry. It also bears mentioning that J.K. Rowling is not just a wash-up children's author. Both major parties in the UK are vying for her attention, with Kemi Badenoch, leader of the Conservative Party, stating the following.
J.K. Rowling tweeted support for you in the past, particularly on gender issues. Would you give her a peerage?
I would. I don't know whether she would take it, but I certainly would give her a peerage. I managed to get Dr. Hilary Cass a peerage because I knew that she was somebody who would have a strong voice in Parliament. These women who have fought for so much need protection. They're attacked relentlessly by all sorts of oddballs and bad people, and I'm really pleased to see her taking up the peerage in the Lords.
Hasn't she?
Meanwhile, the current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, practically fell over himself during the 2024 elections to reassure Rowling that he had every intention of hurting trans people on her behalf, making this the only pledge he's actually kept. It was also reported last year that J.K. Rowling donated over £70,000 to a gender-critical group seeking to restrict the definition of a woman based on reproductive capacity, the very same campaign which just won at the UK Supreme Court, potentially undoing over a decade and a half of trans protections and legal precedent. Said move defined women by their reproductive capabilities, setting women's liberation back decades, all whilst Rowling gleefully celebrated, happy in the knowledge that said ruling opens all women seen as not feminine enough to verbal, physical, and sexual violence. So, while some people might think it's okay to ignore Rowling's open support for rabid Antisemites on the notion that she's got no real power, the evidence paints a very different picture. Stuff like this and the post the other week in which Rowling labels someone a quote-unquote heroine for confessing that they just recorded a podcast in which they very explicitly asserted that, quote, trans is a civilization-ending concept, end quote, has a lot of trans people scared. If you're a cis person who has trans family and friends, particularly if they're in the UK, you need to take this seriously. Check in on your loved ones and see how you can get organised to fight gender-critical fascism. Putting feet on the ground is always good, But there's a lot more that can be done, whether it be research, education, advocacy, or even support. The trans community really needs you to step up if we're to beat back Rowling and her hateful agenda. Though, what do you think? What are your thoughts on the exchange? What are other examples of anti-Semitism within the gender critical movement? Are there any ways to get people to take this danger seriously? Did you notice something I missed? If so, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. And if you appreciate what we do here and want to help keep us running, please consider becoming one of the wonderful patrons who make our work possible. You can also make a one-time donation via PayPal or Super Thanks on YouTube. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Flynn, and Higgins the Seagull. And for myself, Adita and Levi, take care now.